So let's talk about some specific methods of how to do what Savannah just explained. So these are some typical ways people study: highlighting, rereading the book, reviewing your class notes, and cramming. And this may have worked pretty well in undergrad, but it doesn't work in law school, and it's not the best way to learn. What you're doing with these methods is reviewing information in a very passive way, and it lulls you into a false sense of security that you know things that you haven't really learned. And the worst possible thing you can do in law school is cram the night before, because on the day of the exam, you need all your mental faculties to be working at their highest level. And if you stayed up all night and you're tired, you can't do that complex analytical thinking that you need to answer a law exam question. So the night before the exam, if you've been studying the whole semester, you should take the night off. Eat a good dinner, watch a movie, do something fun, go to bed early, eat a good breakfast. But cramming is a really bad idea. So how does learning work? Most people think your brain is a sponge, and all you have to do is pour in the information and it's there. But that's not how it works. Learning happens when you pull the information out of your brain. The more often you retrieve it, the better you learn it. So we have to find lots of opportunities to retrieve information. There's a lot of memorization in law school. And if you want to Google something called the memory palace, it's about finding bizarre connections and obscure things to help you remember. And the more bizarre it is, the better you will remember. There are also mnemonics. Poacher is a really cool mnemonic. If you haven't had property yet, it relates to an area of law called adverse possession, which is basically legalized trespassing. And poacher is a great acronym because a poacher has to trespass to be a poacher. So the first letter of each, the first letter of each word here gives you the elements of adverse possession. And so that's a great one to remember. But any tricks you can come up with that will help you memorize things, that's a great technique. So what does work when you're going beyond rote memorization? We're going to talk about evidence-based learning, and some of the techniques are prediction, spaced repetition, retrieval practice, interleaving, and feedback-driven metacognition. We'll look at each one in turn. So I learned prediction when my son was in elementary school learning to read, and his teachers would say, "What do you think is going to happen next when you're reading the story?" That is a really active way of engaging with the material. So they put those questions at the end of the chapter of your casebook for a reason. So read the questions first and be thinking about them while you're doing the reading. Anything that gets your brain actively engaged with the material is going to help. For example, when you're reading a case, guess, which way is the court going to hold in this situation? Which way are they going to go? And then when you get to the end of the case, you find out which way they went. So prediction works even when you're wrong. That's the bizarre thing about it. The fact that you made the prediction, you're basically pulling out the file drawer and making a file folder to put the correct information in when you get it. And so when you find out what the correct information is, you've got a place in your brain to put it. But the only worrying thing about prediction is you've got to make sure you get the correct answer soon so that you don't accidentally learn the wrong thing. Spaced repetition. Again, retrieving this information out of your brain, there's something called the forgetting curve, where you remember most of the information for a short time, and then the more time passes, you forget more and more. So if you wait 3 days in between studying the same information, then come back to it and see what you remember. That's a great retrieval technique. Which brings us to retrieval. My favorite retrieval technique is the data dump. And it's really important that you take a blank sheet of paper and write down everything you know about the topic. You're not reviewing anything, you're not looking anything, it's what do you actually know. Now, when you go back and review your notes and reread, you're looking for specific information to fill in the holes of what you didn't know. And this works great as a study group activity where everybody takes the blank sheet of paper, writes down what they know about the topic, and then you share the information. I guarantee you different people will remember different things, and then you can figure out what the whole group missed and go back and fill in that information. Again, anything that's an active learning process is going to help. Interleaving. Don't just study one subject, mix it up. There's a great example from a book called Make It Stick, where they use baseball practice. So coach says it's curveball night. Pitchers pitch curveballs, batters hit curveballs, catchers catch curveballs all night. So by the end of the night, everybody thinks they're really good at curveballs, but you knew it was going to be a curveball. So again, you've lulled yourself into a false sense of security that you know how to do something you don't. In an actual baseball game, you don't know what kind of pitch is coming next, and you have to be ready for anything. So mix it up. Feedback-driven metacognition is a big word that goes back to what Savannah was talking at the beginning. You have to figure out what you know and what you don't know so that you're studying the things you don't know rather than reviewing stuff you already know that you don't need to review because you already know it. Again, quiz yourself without looking at your notes, blank sheet of paper. Flashcards work great for this, but you can't peek. You have to be honest with yourself. Did you know what was on the other side of that flashcard, or didn't you? And again, you set aside the cards that you missed and fill in those holes another way. So in conclusion, we encourage you to keep trying until you find what works for you. Any last words, Savannah?
It's a hard process, but remember, we're here for you. Your professors are here for you. Again, we're just here to kind of lead you through and help you get where you want to go.
Well, we only have one participant, so I'm going to ask Caitlin if she has any questions.
I don't at this time. Do you have, sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Sorry, my connection's going in and out. I guess particularly for in the practice of like what you were talking about with the retrieval methods of making flashcards, when you're in the process of outlining for exams for a semester, is there a way to incorporate, for example, making flashcards during that process, or would you recommend typically doing those as two separate sort of study sessions?
I think that's a great idea to make the flashcards as you're doing your outline, because then you're doing it twice, right? You're figuring out what you're putting in your outline, and then you're making the flashcards, and that's like double reinforcement. And the very act of creating the outline and making the flashcards is helpful too. A lot of people use canned outlines and canned flashcards, and they're okay, but it's really best if you make them yourself, as long as you confirm that the information is correct.
And both of those processes are very mechanical. It's very much you usually looking at your source notes, your textbook, and moving it onto the guide. So that's kind of an early step as opposed to what we were talking about with when you're using them and checking to make sure your actual knowledge. So that's a little bit more complex from a cognitive standpoint.
Oh, and spaced repetition. So you make your outline, and then 3 days later, you make the flashcards. And that's reminding yourself and reinforcing what you just did in the outline and retrieving it again.
And maybe this is earlier in the semester, maybe like a week or two after you do it in class, so that by the time you get towards the end of the semester, you're only doing that retrieval process.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate your advice.
Thanks for coming.
Oh, Well, thanks, Heather and Savannah.
Yep, I'm turning off the recording.
Yay.